Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Worship Leader Training Podcast, a monthly podcast for worship leaders with practical training to help you excel musically, theologically, and pastorally. Today is part 2 of a 2-part series on wise boundaries with the opposite sex in ministry. Last month, we had Dr. Zack Carter on to discuss wise boundaries with the opposite sex from a scientific perspective and an academic perspective, and it's already one of our most downloaded episodes to date, which tells me that there is a huge need and a huge desire for people to discuss these things in the church. Well, we're going to continue that discussion today in our second ever Worship Leader Roundtable. We've got 5 worship leaders discussing what it practically looks like to have wise boundaries with the opposite sex in our ministries, and how it plays out in our day-to-day interactions with them. But first, our recommended product of the month. We've got Core Sound Pads. Core Sound Pads is a new company making the best sounding worship pads on the market. These aren't the types of pads that your keyboard player has to play. These are pads that sit in the background of the song in the root keys, and you can add them to Ableton Live or even just add them to an iPhone playlist, and they sit beneath your mix and create beautiful atmospheres for your songs. The amazing thing about Core Sound Pads that I love is that they've created 8 unique sounding sets of pads. So each pad set comes in every key, so you just find the sound that best matches the feeling of your song, and you drop it into Ableton or to your iPhone playlist and hit play and go. Unlike other pads that can overwhelm your mix, these pads were painstakingly EQ'd to stay out of the way of the main elements of your mix, like your vocals. And so they just sit perfectly there and add this nice texture and ambience. You can hear how the pads create the perfect atmosphere for the quiet parts of your songs and in between songs as you transition or as you pray. You can check out Core Sound Pads for free. And if you decide to buy them, you can use the promo code WLT Podcast at checkout to save 20% off any pad bundle. Again, WLT Podcast to save 20%, and all the links are in the show notes of your podcast app. All right, let's get into our discussion with our 5 worship leaders on wise boundaries with the opposite sex. Hey everybody, I am here with several worship leaders from across the United States. I have Brenton Collier, who is the worship pastor at Calvary Monterey in California, and he's also the founder of the Restore Worship Conference. Hey Brenton.
Hey Alex. Then
I have Justin Kalama, who is a worship pastor at Hope Chapel and also a songwriter and producer in Hermosa Beach, California. Hey Justin.
Hey Alex.
Got another Justin Bell, who is the worship pastor at Calvary Nexus in Camarillo, California. And then representing the ladies, we've got the female perspective from Chrissy Nordoff. Chrissy is an award-winning songwriter and worship leader from Franklin, Tennessee. And you also have the Brave Worship Podcast and Conference, right, Chrissy, which is a worship leader female resource, right, aiming at the female worship leaders out there.
Absolutely.
So thank you guys all for being here and giving of your time. I know you're all very busy, and I know you're here because you care about worship leaders and you care about people having long-lasting, healthy ministries. And, last month we talked to a specialist who studies marriages and affairs and how that all plays out, particularly among those in ministry. And now, learning from the academic side was great, but now I want to ask you guys, how does this actually unfold and play out in your respective ministries? And so I think the first question I'd like to ask is, just so that our listeners have a little bit of perspective on where you're coming from, I'd like you to kind of rate yourself in terms of how conscientious are you in your interactions with the opposite sex? Like from a 1 to a 10, are you a 10, extremely careful, and you're constantly limiting your interactions with the opposite sex? Or are you a 1, which would be like you never think about it at all, and you just treat everyone the same? Or are you like somewhere in the middle? How would you rate yourself? Let's just start with Brenton.
Okay. I'd say I'm probably tend towards being a little bit more conscientious, so maybe like a 6 or a 7. But at the same time, it's still really important for me to interact with the women in our worship ministry and on appropriate levels. But I try not to push the extreme too far where they feel disconnected or discluded. So in appropriate ways, even though I'm conscientious of it, there's still a decent, level of interaction and conversation and encouragement and participation for me.
Cool. How about you, Justin Bell?
Yeah, I would say I would call myself a recovering 10. I'm probably now more towards maybe like a 7 or an 8. Before I got married, I mean, I was just, really afraid that I would ever, do something. And I still think it's really good to have really firm boundaries. But I think I've softened up a little bit over the years, to conversing with the opposite sex rather than just being super awkward.
Nice. Let's go, Chrissy. Where would you rate yourself?
I would say probably about a 7. And so, I work a lot of times with a lot of guys. So it's just, it's something that is necessary for me to be able to know how to navigate through. And I'm not, I don't fear it, but at the same time, we've put boundaries in place and try to be wise, just kind of wading through, those situations. And we have talked through things and established boundaries with our marriage. Yeah.
Awesome. And Justin Kalama, where do you rate yourself?
I'd probably say play it safe and say a safe number, like a 6 or a 7, maybe desiring to be 8 or 9. My personal experience, I came from, I've been working for the church for 2.5 years, but before that I worked in the architectural and design world. And so through school, you're constantly working in teams with men and women, and those go long hours. And then in the office, you're working side by side with women. So at that time, it was nothing to, be sitting and having lunch with a coworker because you're talking about work and things like that. But as I've come here, I've just become so much more sensitive. It's such a different environment that I've just become way more aware of it. And thankfully on staff, it's something we do talk about, especially between our co-male pastors. We hold each other accountable, and it's something we talk about. So I've been moving towards a 7 or 8, I would say.
That's really good. It's great to hear that your church is talking about it, because I don't think many churches do. And I'll just say where I'm coming from, I used to be like a 1. I literally never thought about treating men and women differently. I was, texting females. I was calling them, encouraging them, praying for them, meeting with them. I never took them to lunch or anything, but I would totally meet with girls in my office if I needed to talk with them or they needed to talk to me. But after realizing that's just not a good idea, in the last maybe 2 or 3 years, I've swung almost to the opposite end of the spectrum, where I'm probably like an 8, maybe a 9. People would say I'm probably really stiff around females who aren't my wife. And so that's just kind of helpful for our listeners to hear where we're coming from. And so now that we kind of know where you rate on the scale, let's just kind of ask the question, do any of you have any rules, like hard rules that you hold yourself to in your interactions with the opposite sex? Like, Billy Graham used to never meet with females alone, or he would never be alone with females. Do any of you have any rules like that?
I can jump in on that. That's definitely a rule, not just for myself personally and between my wife and I, but, for the men and the pastors at our church. Yeah, we just aren't in an environment alone with women. So, and that's just like a real clearly communicated element. So that's definitely a hard and fast rule. So I'll there've been several times I've connected with women in our team, and if we need to talk, we usually just sit in the sanctuary after service. There are people around, but it's still like a private conversation. And I remember one particular night, there was a wonderful gal on our team was just sharing all kinds of things with me after a service. We were talking for a while, and a lot of people had cleared out, but I was aware that one of our other pastors, and he saw us talking, and so he just hung out and stuck around, there, just kind of doing his thing, and just kind of his presence there in the room. And it was a big room, so it wasn't like right in the next row or anything, but just kind of he was aware, hey, I'm not going to go ahead and head home with the chance that Brenton's going to end up here all alone at 9:00 at night with this woman. So that was a great kind of safety and kind of having accountability with one another and having each other's back in that scenario. And I'm glad he did, because it was a great conversation, just really helpful, really fruitful. So
cool. Anyone else have any rules, hard rules?
I'll go. I have a couple. One of them for us at our church, I was really agreeing with Dr. Carter on the last episode talking about counseling. That's a big one for us. Is we generally speaking won't have like an ongoing counseling or mentoring between a man and a woman. Our counseling department we'll usually try to set up a female with one of our female counselors and vice versa. The only exception is like the first meeting. We may have one of our a female person needing counseling meet with one of our male pastors and then referring them out to a female to be able to counsel them. Another thing for me is, I really identified when I was a lot younger with kind of that Billy Graham. He was famous for he wouldn't even go in an elevator alone with a woman. And, like for me personally, I just try to never be alone with a woman, never give a woman a car ride home. I mean, I'll make exceptions, here and there, but that's something I really try to hold fast to. I'm a big fan of, I think friendships with the opposite gender are great, but I think that there do need to be firm boundaries. So for me personally, I won't carry in like an ongoing texting relationship with somebody of the opposite sex. I'll a couple texts back and forth talking about logistics or if they need prayer, yes, I'll pray for you. But if it keeps going, then it's like we need to move this into a group setting, or maybe let me help you get connected with a mentor who can help you with what's going on. That for me personally, those are a couple boundaries.
Yeah, Alex, for a lot of what Justin Bell just said is sounds a lot how we do it here, but we try and focus, kind of like Brenton said earlier, is we have mostly male pastors. We do have some women pastors, but they are outnumbered by men. So the last thing we'd ever want is for a female congregant to feel like she doesn't have access to pastoral guidance. And so remembering that that's our role. And so if a woman does come, making sure that she feels cared for and that we're directing her and shepherding her, at the same time maintaining these wise boundaries, and having these rules. And some of it I think is it might be their first time, even if it's awkward, that you say, I'd like to go sit over here, or let's keep the door open or whatever. And I'd rather err on the side of it being awkward. So it might be the first time that they ever realize that, hey, it's actually, I should be careful. I shouldn't be going into a closed room with another man at church or anywhere else. The ongoing counseling, we don't do that either. So after we might want to get context to someone's situation and again make them know that we care. But then again, just like Justin Bell said, try and direct them to a leader in the church and give those other people in church an opportunity to minister to them and kind of partner with them with whatever they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Chrissy, I'd like to hear from you. You're in an interesting context because you're a professional songwriter and you're writing songs with males all the time, males and females, obviously. But many of the best songs that are coming out for the church are co-written. And so you'll probably be paired up with a guy or a girl or, but let's say a guy in this case. And do they close you off in a room together or how does that work?
Yeah, a lot of times that is how it works. So in all honesty, I work with integrity music specifically, but there's no real, as far as the corporate side of things, there's no real, hard and fast rules as far as all that's handled. It's more of an individual basis. But yeah, a lot of times, I'll get a text or a phone call that so-and-so is looking for a song and they want to write, and here's the date, time, and place. And, for my husband and I personally, what we've tried to do as far as handling that is, well, first of all, we have all access to each other's phones, Facebook, emails, whatever we want to access at any time, we have all access. And then second of all, I try to always write in a public place, even though a lot of times it's me and another guy that are writing. Now, sometimes, adding a third person in is a great idea, but in this profession, that is not always an option. And if you want to stay in this profession, then you have to be able to write one-on-one with a male. That's just how it is. And not only that, but sometimes I'm sent out to a home that I don't know, for instance. And so I try to write always in a public place. If that is not possible, if I need to head out to the producer's house to write, for instance, we've set up a password system. So for me, if I ever feel weird or if I feel, whatever I'm feeling, I know that my husband and my publisher both know my password. And if I text them my password, I know that they're on the way to wherever I am. So I make sure every time 2 people know where I am, the address, and the time I'm going to be there. And then I've already, pre-set up that I have this password system. So that's kind of the way that we have figured out to navigate through the system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What about the ongoing writing process? Because I know for me, like a lot of times I'll write a song or we'll start a song and then it's like we're texting back and forth nonstop, like ideas or voice memos like, hey, do you like this? And then it's just like it can go on for weeks and weeks and weeks. How do you and your husband kind of just make sure that stays above board?
Really, most of the time I complete the songs within the writing session anymore, but I have one specific co-writer that, he's a real processor and I can get that way too. And it takes us months to write a song. So with that person in particular, we've never really discussed, hey, here's how we're going to do it. But, what we've done is we've just emailed back and forth, which again is all access. So if I have an idea, I'll put my voice memo on the email, type in my little note, send it to him, and then he'll do the same and send it back. There's really no chit chat, no personal kind of conversation really at all. I mean, it's pretty much business, And that particular person is really one of my favorite people to write with, and we've somehow made it work. And he's not here in town, so that's another obstacle to overcome. So you have to then figure out how are you going to make it work distance wise. But that's been the best thing, just doing email back and forth. However, I have done some Skype sessions too.
Yeah. Aren't you guys jealous that she finishes songs in one session? That's why she's a pro.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Oh man, isn't it interesting too also how email seems to have some more emotional distance than texting for some reason. I don't know why, but I do the same thing as you, Chrissy, where like even this morning a girl on my team texted me and said, "Hey, I have to work till 7 and I'll be there as soon as I can to rehearsal tonight." And instead of texting her back, I just sent her an email. I said, "Got your text, thanks, no problem, see you tonight." And I know that seems like weird to like go out of your way, but it also says something, I'm going to stick to email just because it's less personal for some reason. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, and I like how you responded that way because it's subtle and, it's not offensive to her in any way.
Sure. Anybody else have any thoughts on boundaries?
Yeah, I want to jump in on what I love what Chrissy was saying, just about the idea that her husband, and her producer know like where she is at all times. And that's one of the things that, my wife and I do that we started when we first got married. I mean, kind of out of convenience, but we synced our calendars, on iCal. And so at all times, my wife knows like where I am, who I'm meeting with, and some of those things. And it's a benefit just when you're married because then she's like, can ask me, hey, how did counseling go with so-and-so during the day? And I think just kind of that principle of having that openness in your relationship, when you're like going to meet with someone or talk with somebody and you don't want to tell your spouse, like something's up with your heart. And that's something that you may need to look into a little bit more. Like why would I not want to openly share this information with my spouse that I'm going to be with this person? So I think kind of maintaining that openness within your marriage really kind of protects a lot of things, and it kind of has that built-in accountability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can also sync, or not sync, but you can share your location on your iPhones, right? So so if people don't know about that, I don't know where it is in the settings, but figure it out and sync that with your spouse so they know where you are all the time. And Chrissy, I like what you said too, is that you and that person that you co-write with over email, you said that you never really just chit chat, you kind of stick to business, but that's something that you had to choose to do, right? It's like both you and him are choosing to keep it very professional. And I think that's kind of the key here for worship pastors is like, we do have to obviously work with females or the opposite gender, and we have to show care for those people, but we also have to like keep it professional and kind of limit our amount of care. And I have a feeling that some people listening would say that we're being prudish, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I liked what Dr. Carter said on the last episode. He said, I'd rather somebody be offended with my boundaries with them than offending my wife.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to look at it.
I think it's, something that I think about a lot is my wife is a worship leader, and so she, is here at our church and interacts a lot, and she also does events and conferences and things. And so I think about her perspective as a woman a lot of times. I believe that women absolutely can and should have just as much, opportunity, responsibility, leadership as if the Lord has anointed them and called them into that. My doctrine and theology says in worship leading specifically that's okay. I believe that's all right. And so what I don't want to do is put myself in a position where I'm keeping all of the women in our team at such an arm's length that there's just a wall. Like they're never going to get the leadership opportunities that men in our team will, or they're never going to be able to be involved in the songwriting processes or the recording processes that we're doing for albums or the planning processes for events or things like that, or whatever it may be. And so I'm kind of always having this dialogue in my mind and with other pastors and with my wife, like, man, how can I be, so transparent, so accountable, but also just be like friendly, and be available, because the last thing I want to do is to alienate women. I don't mind if they feel a little bit uncomfortable or awkward, because in a moment where I'm in a situation that I don't like, I just call it out. That's fine. I don't mind that at all. But just over time and as the months and years go by and as someone gets involved with our team, it's just, and I don't know if you guys want to speak into that and maybe even give some insight into that, but that's just something that it's kind of this tension, you know what I mean? Because I think on one hand, it would be easier just to say like, I'm going to talk to the women in my team as little as possible and then I'll be, good to go. But I just don't think that's right either, so just kind of finding that balance between being friendly, connecting with them in appropriate ways, in transparent ways. I just think it's really important also.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about that a little bit. You guys have any insights on how to care for the females or the opposite gender on your team?
I have a few thoughts. Well, first of all, the first thing in my head that I'm thinking about right now is, women have been hurt in the past because of being left out of things only because they're female, and that's the only reason. Sometimes that is still happening. I was at I sang for a general assembly locally here for a certain denomination this summer and was really surprised that the female pastors were still not allowed to vote for, making all the bylaws and things for the denomination. So there is still some of that is going on that's totally unrelated to this issue. But I think because some women have experienced that, coming into a situation like this, it might feel exactly the same, that they're being shut down because they're a woman. So I think it's important to support them, like you were just saying, with wise boundaries. And really, in my heart, I feel like if it crosses a point where you feel like it's not healthy for you to shepherd that person, then the best thing for you to do is to offer them another resource that will be very valuable to them and help pour into them from a different place. And honestly, my sister and I just recently, in the last year, have launched a ministry specifically because of that dynamic. We know that there's worship pastors that can't mentor up some of these younger girls. It just does cross some lines. And we've kind of stood up and said, hey, guys, you can send you can send your girls to us if they need some mentoring. We'll help, So we see that need. And yeah, and I think outsourcing is really valuable if you find the right thing.
Chrissy, that's really helpful to hear, and I'm actually really excited to look into your ministries and what you're working on and those resources that are available. For me, what comes to mind is once I point that person to that resource, one way I can still show them that I care is continuously following up. Hey, have you talked to that person? How's it going? And so that's a way to show that continuous care for their life and their spiritual state without, them needing to necessarily pour out all of their emotions or what they're going through on you on a continual basis. So you gain context, you show you care, point them towards those resources, and then maintain that relationship. And it's really helpful to hear your point of view, Chrissy.
Anyone else? How do you show care to the opposite gender?
Well, for me, I said in the beginning of the episode, I described myself as a recovering 10. It was just kind of extreme, I think, when I was a little bit, younger in ministry. And a lot of that changes kind of come from my wife. My wife mentioned to me a couple of years ago, she was observing me in a group setting. We had a bunch of couples over at our house, and she said, it's okay for you to talk to my friends, right? It's okay for you to be friends with the girl, the wives of of your friends. And, you don't have to be ignoring them and not talking to them and really just kind of learning that I think really biblical way of how the Bible describes how we should view relationships with the opposite gender. The scriptures say that other women are to be looked at as sisters, in the faith. And I've been blessed. I have a younger sister who's 3.5 years younger than me. And, I love my sister. We talk, we have a friendship, we have a relationship. I care about her. I want to make sure that she's okay. But because she's my sister, it's that strictly that, that friendship and that familial type of relationship. So I think that's really what the scriptures teach. And it seems that, people tend to be at the extremes of that scale, that either they have no healthy boundaries whatsoever, or they have so many boundaries that they're not treating the person like they're a sister, but they're treating them like they're a stranger. And I think that we need to kind of look at what the scriptures teach about those relationships, and we should be, women looking at men as brothers in Christ, or older men as fathers in Christ, and vice versa for men. So that's been huge for me, just looking at that biblical mandate for how we should interact in relationships.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking about the last month or so and my interactions with the girls on my team, and I'm thinking most of the time that I'm showing care for them is in a group setting, and it's at rehearsal or before rehearsal. And so a couple just examples come to mind. So there's one girl on my team who she wants to start a blog and a YouTube channel for holistic living, and I love entrepreneurial people, so I'm kind of I encourage her. I'm hey, I know you have a lot of good advice to give to people, and I want to encourage you to do it. And I'll ask her every so often, hey, how's it going? Are you working on it? How can I help? And then there's another girl, I could tell she wasn't doing well that day, and I said, are you okay? She said no. And I said, what's going on? And she told me, and so I said, let's pray. And so right outside my office, everyone's walking around the sanctuary. I put my hand on her shoulder and I prayed for her, And so I think just like Justin Kalama, you said, just kind of checking in with them and asking them. But I tend to do it. I don't go out of my way to do it over text or over email or over phone call. I try to do it when they're already here so they don't get any wrong ideas about, my motives. So
yeah, I think what we want to be aware of and work against is them feeling like they don't have access. So I could imagine a scenario where a girl might, in conversation, something comes up and we kind of talk about it for a moment, and like Chrissy's suggesting, maybe eventually you move them on to a resource. But if I never ask her again and she's at rehearsal and she's leading with me on service and I just say, hey, great job on that harmony, and she leaves the stage, and that goes on for 3 months, and I never once say, hey, how's that difficult situation going? She's absolutely going to feel closed off because my actions are showing that I just pushed her off, and all she's good for right now is just filling her role as a singer and musician. And that's the last thing you would want one of your congregants feeling.
It sounds like I've heard several comments so far about you guys saying stuff like you'll actually say out loud to the person, hey, maybe we should move over there. And so you'll bring, hey, I don't feel comfortable meeting alone in my office. So that's great that you guys are actually saying these things for them to hear and think about. But I want to ask you guys, how about with your spouses? Did all of you have the conversation with your spouse of like, hey, what's appropriate for me, what's not? Or how did it come up? Did it come up because your spouse got angry because you treated someone a certain way? Or I just love to hear about a little bit into that, how open communication goes with your spouse about this topic.
Yeah, I'd like to speak on that. Your first podcast, stimulated a more direct conversation with my wife, as you guys talked about transparency with your spouse and being intentional about these things. And then, anticipating this conversation we're having now, I was able to kind of sit with my wife and say, hey, here's kind of what I think about these things. What do you think? And it was great. It was a great conversation. And I've just I'm learning more to rely on her and to really trust her judgment. One experience I had was there was a young woman who was a part of the worship ministry for a few years and just kind of slowly drifted away, kind of just slowly disappeared. And I know that other women on the team had reached out to her, said, hey, and her actions made it clear that she just wasn't interested in coming back to church. So many months went by, and I just felt like I didn't feel like I did everything I could to invite her back. So I drafted a letter. And right before I click send, I'm like, I'm going to send this to my wife. And I send this letter to my wife. Hey, can you just look at this, make sure there's nothing weird in it? And, she came back very alarmed, saying, you cannot send that letter. Shared it with her mom. And, at first I was really defensive because I thought I felt like this was something I needed to do. But then I realized, I need to trust their judgment and not send this letter. And so, I'm just learning more and more that transparency and involving her to an appropriate level is a super important thing to do.
I really like what you said, Justin, about trusting our spouses, because I think my wife is like one of the most intuitive people I've ever met. And so if she says to me, hey, I don't really like the way that girl's interacting with you. At first, the first time she said that, I was like, I don't see it. I don't know what you're talking about. And then with time, I started to realize, man, women are really, really wise. Right, Chrissy?
Yes. They've got a sixth sense about each other.
Yeah, totally. So, Let's move on. I don't want to get bogged down here. We've kind of talked a little bit about communication. It seems like most of you guys are very cognizant about how you're communicating via text and via email. Let's talk maybe now about like physical interactions, right? Like the Bible says, greet each other with a holy kiss. Should we go around kissing each other? What are the physical boundaries that you guys have set in place? I'd love to hear Chrissy from a female perspective.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's a little bit more... The whole songwriting world is a little bit more casual. So I do give hugs, like that's kind of normal in that setting. And so, but not unless I've known someone for a long time. And like I'm thinking of specifically my worship pastor, who I call my brother. And he calls me sister, so we call each other that, you know what I mean? And I do see him as my big brother. I'll give him a hug on Sunday mornings. But if it's a first-time co-write and not what I know to be yet as a safe relationship, then I probably won't.
I love how you call them brother and sister. I mean, I think that I do that too, and it actually helps kind of set sort of a... like, hey, I'm your brother. I'm your, it's yes. Like sets a boundary.
Exactly. And when I think in my mind, like, that happens when it's been a long-standing relationship. Obviously it's, it feels like family. But yet you're still saying that word. And so it's still throwing it out there that's how I see you. I see you as my brother, Yeah,
that's good. Anyone else? Physical interactions?
Hearing Chrissy describe that it's kind of how I function in our ministry, but I try and take it a case-by-case basis. Like I don't have a hard rule that says I think last episode, Alex, you said, fist bumps and high fives. I don't have a rule like that. There's times where, someone on the team, hey, it's great to see you, or congratulations on this thing, and a hug happens. But it's a case-by-case basis, and some of the women are a lot older, and there's maybe some safety in that, and there's a different relationship there than with the young girl, right out of high school or something that's learning how to play piano. I'm not going to go in and give her a hug on Sunday morning, and I guess we all have to just make those judgments.
Yeah, that's interesting as you're saying that, Justin. I'm trying to think through, it seems like the hug is like the level, the barometer here. Mm-hmm. But, as I'm thinking about that and the women on my team, kind of my interaction is kind of a combination of the two of you. Like if there's someone I'm just meeting, usually what I'll do in my posture is I'll just make it really clear. Cause again, I want women to be comfortable and welcomed. And so I'll just make it really clear, like what's happening. So if I see them, I'll just put my hand out if this is going to be like a handshake kind of moment. Or sometimes as I'm greeting someone and someone comes by, I'll just have my hands in my pockets and stand still and just smile. Good morning. It's wonderful to see you. Glad you're here. Anything I can help you with? I'm just standing there. So it's like, I'm not coming in, nothing, you know what I mean? And I think that just hopefully puts women at ease. Like, oh, okay, that's what we're doing. All right. Feel good about that. But yeah, as I'm thinking about because there are some gals on our team that I've known for a long time, and it's not like every time I see them, but from time to time I'll give them a hug, a side hug, and just say, whatever it is, thanks for serving today. But I'm actually realizing I don't do that with any of the like younger women, and we don't have a lot of older women on our team. But I'd more do that with peers. So I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm just like getting that out there. I actually don't really feel comfortable doing that with like younger girls, but if it's someone, a friend of my wife and I's or something that I know really well, then it's kind of like it just like a handshake. It's like a handshake feels weird. Like I'm literally putting you at arm's length there with this handshake. So yeah, I feel like in public, that's fine to encourage them that way a little bit.
I'm all about hugging the old ladies. All right, let's.
Alex. Real quick on this topic is I've always been encouraged by our senior pastor to have a female leader within the worship ministry that I have confidence in, where she's like the boss of that. Like she keeps her eyes on you and has like Chrissy said, she's going to pick up on things that I'm not aware of. And so she's the one who has 100% access to say, hey, that was weird, or like, hey, you shouldn't do that, or whatever, right? And so...
and she's an old lady?
Yeah, could be. And that's why I say, well then, now you need another set of eyes protecting you and that close female leader that you're entrusting yourself, so how far does it go? But just keeping it a part of your culture, not making it a weird thing where, hey, I noticed your skin touched that person's skin. Those things get weird. It's a case by case, having discernment and being wise and working as a team to protect each other.
Yeah. Working as a team to protect each other is a huge phrase. And also just kind of, it seems like the real issue here is just being aware of your own heart and how your interactions are with people. I want to ask one last question.
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
One more thing about that. I'm sorry. I think it's important to know your own heart. And I think it's also important to be sensitive to other people as well. There was that recent statistic that came out that, 1 in 4 women have been assaulted sexually in some way. And, and there's been debates on how accurate that statistic may or may not be. But the reality is that, I know women in my church that have literally told me, like, I don't feel comfortable hugging people. And, you can look at their body language and it's something that you never want to, make people feel, uncomfortable. And, I'll also say that I'm a big fan of using the term chronologically mature as opposed to older, personally.
All right. Okay. Well, I want to ask one last question and then give a couple of like real life scenarios and see how you would handle them. So here's the last question, and then we'll get into some scenarios. Do you guys think we should impose our convictions on our team members? So I've been a part of some larger churches that have like a green room, and I've seen, two members of the opposite sex having a conversation during one of the services when they finish playing, and they'll carry that conversation, just the two of them, through all three services or whatever, and all the other musicians are kind of in and out of the room, and they're in there alone sometimes. Should we, as leaders, help them be aware of how this looks? Should we encourage them to not be alone in the green room? Like, should we impose our convictions? ?
I do, to a certain extent. We have a rehearsal room or a studio in the far back of our church behind a storage area. And, I'll get a text from someone saying, hey, me and this girl, we're going to work on a song. And I'll tell him, like, that's fine, but I want you to keep the door open. And so, again, it might be his first time hearing something like that, but it's to protect both of them, but it's also to protect him, So to a certain extent, yeah. If we're responsible for those spaces in our church and how they're being used and responsible for our people as congregants, I think we have to impose our convictions to an appropriate level.
Yeah, and I think the nature of, overseeing a ministry is there's times where you need to have, certain standards or maybe guidelines, within your ministry. But generally speaking, I would say that when it comes to, more of a gray area, something that is a conviction, generally, rather than mandating that other people share your conviction, I think it's probably healthier to encourage people to wrestle through that dynamic for themselves. So, when the two people are alone in a room, rather than telling them that they're not allowed to be alone in a room, maybe talking to one of them or both of them and encouraging them, hey, I just encourage you to wrestle through this, and here's why. And I know that you want to, live above reproach, and you want to honor the Lord and protect yourself from, possible pitfalls. It's a lot better for people to wrestle through those things than to have those, convictions be mandated to them, in my opinion. But there are places I used to be in youth ministry, and we had a firm leader that, there was never to be a leader alone with any of the students. And, you couldn't have, a guy leader giving a 14-year-old girl, a ride home after youth group. I mean, there's a time where, in certain contexts, you do have to mandate things like that.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got 5 real-life scenarios, and instead of having each of you answer each one, I'm just going to ask each one of you one real-life scenario, and you tell us what you would do. If any of you feel really strongly about one that I asked someone else, you can tag on the end of it. So here are some real-life scenarios. I want you to tell me what you would do in this situation. Okay. It's after rehearsal, and you're shutting down, and someone from the opposite sex keeps hanging around and lingering. What do you do, Justin?
What I do is, if I notice that and I know we're going to have a conversation, I catch the eyes of one of my co-leaders and I say, hey, you're not leaving yet, right? I needed to talk to you about something. And they stick around, so there's safety in that, and we can have the conversation we need to. And that person, pretends to roll cables 50 feet away for 20 minutes.
Awesome. Okay. How about this one? This one's really tricky. There's someone you find very physically attractive and they want to be part of your team. And to make matters worse, they're actually very talented. What do you do, Brenton?
Okay. So what is it? They're really attractive, but unfortunately they're really talented. This is the scenario?
Yeah, to make matters worse. Yeah, so they're very good looking. You find yourself physically attracted to them, and they're very talented, and they want to be part of your team. What do you do? That's a hard one.
Yeah, that is pretty hard. Well, I guess physically attractive is subjective, but if you're really finding yourself attracted to someone, gosh, I feel like you've probably got to be honest and say, it's just probably not wise for me to put myself around this person all the time. Man, I don't even know how you'd handle that, but I think that's probably a conversation you need to have with a couple of people and get some wisdom on. if it's not like a major physical attraction, because lots of people are, everybody's good looking, then, generally you would hope that you'd have the maturity to allow those people to be on the team. And since you've got these safeguards, you'll be in good shape. But yeah, that's tricky. I guess maybe get some counsel on that. And like what Justin Bell was saying, just know your own heart, like where you tend towards, and like the pitfalls might lean towards, and just have some wisdom in it.
Yeah. Anyone want to jump in on that one? Because it is a tricky one.
I have a thought about that a little bit. I feel like in a lot of these conversations we're having today, sometimes we think the greatest danger is the possibility of the inappropriate interactions between a man and a woman, basically in the congregation. But really, as a woman, I feel like, and with the history of the church and what we've been through, even a situation like that, like the greatest danger could be the fear of interacting at all. Because if we stop all interaction, we could be shutting down the voice of God that He put in that woman, that she has something specific and different from His heart to share with the congregation that may be life-changing for that congregation. So I think, I know it's complicated, but I feel like, I don't know, sometimes we can get in the way too of what God's wanting to do. And sometimes, a lot of times in situations like that, it's the voice of the woman that gets shut down first.
That's a great perspective. That's why you're here.
Yeah, I want to support Chrissy in that. In that, I think it'd be a sad disqualification for being considered attractive by a co-leader.
Yeah, definitely.
So adding to that, practically speaking, is like our co-leaders, we just tell each other, hey, this person caught my eye. If you ever see me interacting with them, watch, come and ask me, hey, what was that conversation about? Are you on the up and up? Is everything okay? And keeping it out in the forefront, the elephant in the room, not hiding it and letting it go on and on, But I would hate to disqualify a woman for that reason only.
Yeah, and let me just say too, it's kind of that dynamic of you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's be honest. Like every worship leader probably at some point struggles with pride, right? Like I'm tempted towards thinking I'm something because I'm on the stage, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't lead worship because I might be tempted to being prideful when I'm on the stage. I need to repent and work through and confess that pride. And if it's getting out of control and it's really causing me to stumble, then yes, maybe I need to, take a season where I would take a break from, leading worship, just to kind of use that as an analogy. And, I think with somebody who maybe you find attractive, you want to just seek to walk through that in a holy way. If it becomes an issue, then you deal with it, in my opinion.
That's good. That's really good. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time or the listeners' time, but I do want to ask if you guys have any final words for the listeners today.
I think my one last thought would be that we get a clearer picture of the Lord when we get more pieces of His heart, and that just comes through more people. And so I just would encourage people to work together, and that gives us the clearest picture of who Jesus is.
Yeah, I love that. I'd second that. And just, for the men who are listening, I would just say, I loved what Chrissy said about there are women that absolutely have a voice in the church. And, if you've got to bend over backwards and go out of your way to simultaneously have wise boundaries, but also have women in positions of leadership and in positions where they could really be involved and interject what the Lord is doing in their life, then do it. Figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, I would say, I guess in closing that, boundaries are super important. It's something that we need to have, in all areas of our life. But at the end of the day, I think to really win the battle in this area is constantly knowing your heart and, realizing that if in my heart I'm wanting to get close with somebody of the opposite sex, there's a root issue in that, maybe I'm not satisfied in Christ and maybe I'm not satisfied in my marriage, and I need to ask deeper questions to reflect, why am I going to this place in my heart, and there might be something there. And I think that there can be sort of this legalism where we just look to boundaries to solve all those problems for us. But it's really, we need that ongoing, relationship with the Holy Spirit revealing, what's going on inside of us.
Justin Kalama, anything?
Our job as worship leaders and pastors is to equip the saints for ministry. And so God is sprinkling these spiritual gifts throughout his body to men and women, and there to build up and advance the kingdom by functioning in those gifts. And so the last thing we want to do is stand in the way of that. And so the whole ministry is not about protecting other people from me doing something wrong with them. It's also being able to equip people effectively and having a ministry and a structure and accountability, so that my own pride or my own wrestling with the flesh doesn't get in the way of another young woman or young man to be able to be equipped for ministry.
Thank you guys so much for all of your wisdom. I've learned a lot just sitting here and listening, and I'm really thankful to each of you. And I will link in the show notes of this episode links to all of your different websites and projects and things like that. But I'm really thankful for each of you and the way that you have wrestled through this thoughtfully and prayerfully, and now are sharing your wisdom with our listeners. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Wow, some great wisdom in there. Thank you so much, Justin, Brenton, and Chrissy for sharing with us this month. And thanks also to our sponsor of the month, Core Sound Pads. Be sure to check them out. You can try them for free. And if you decide to buy them, enter WLT Podcast at checkout to save 20% on your purchase. Thanks for listening this month. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. You can email me at alex@worshipleadertraining.com or by clicking the email link in the show notes of your podcast app. If you have a question you'd like me to answer in a future episode, you can actually leave us a voicemail by calling 831-607-WLT1 or just click the number in the show notes. If this episode helped you, please help us by forwarding it on to a friend or by sharing it on social media. And we made that very easy for you. You can just click the appropriate link in the show notes of your podcast app. We'll see you next month for another great episode. And in the meantime, visit worshipleadertraining.com for training materials, resources, reviews, and podcasts for worship leaders.